Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, we're back after 1 week. Have you recovered from your traumatic 40 times yet?
Okay, the times.
Well, the times were questionable, but have you recovered from the runs themselves? If you didn't make it to the end of last episode, which it was a long one, fair. The last 20-25 minutes is Arif telling a story about beating a 9-year-old. A 9-year-old. So a 5-year-old at racing. Doing a 40. So check that out. It's absolutely worth it.
I've recovered. I was walking up and down the stairs today and my legs were dragging and I was wondering why it felt like leg day. It might be related actually to a race I ran 2 weeks ago. That might be it.
I like how I've been more athletic than you recently. And like I'm somehow not broken yet. Meanwhile, 2 weeks later, boy, you know, that time I overexerted myself in Indianapolis, a thing you can say.
Hey, a lot of people ran in Indianapolis. I just joined the tradition.
Somebody had asked if you had a better time than the fellow on the NFL Network, Rich Eisen.
Rich Eisen?
I mean, according to the flashing screen, that you were recalling, you had a better time, but
right. The time I was given, I must stress this. The time I was given was better, yeah, by a substantial margin. It was better than a lot of NFL wide receivers, better than Cameron Dantzler's.
That said, it was absolutely fake, 100%. There's not a chance in hell you ran that.
We'll just let the listeners listen to that episode and come to their own conclusions.
Again, the last 20-25 minutes of the last episode were such gold, I ended the show. It's like, no, we're over anyway. We're good. I want nothing to do with any of the other questions. We'll answer them for a Patreon thing later, probably next week. But yeah, just enjoy it. It's fantastic. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. We have lots to talk about. We came back because there was real news to talk about, including a number of signings, a number of releases, a number of question marks that we're going to be looking at as the offseason continues. And of course, Aaron Rodgers made his decision, which wasn't a decision that became a decision. I don't know. Questions are to be asked later. And so much more. But again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and head over there for bonus episodes. I'm probably going to put one out next week. I'm also going to be putting out a little thank you to everyone on the regular side of things. Kind of a preview of what we do over on Patreon. I'll probably be doing that right around the beginning of April, so check that out. We enjoyed doing that last year, so I think we're going to do that again this year, so enjoy that for everybody. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode for bonus material, for Discord access, all of that. It's fun, great. The Discord is a wonderful community of be racist and good people. For the most part, when Dawn is not on it. So check it out.
Two, unsurprisingly, mutually exclusive categories of people.
Yeah, who knew? So check it out, patreon.com/NorseCode. Somebody had asked whether or not it supports us more to do it just month by month or doing the year subscription. The year subscription is really just there if you'd like to just do a full year. We get all of that all at once, which is lovely. But if you want to do it month to month, we technically do get slightly more money month to month, but it doesn't really matter to us as long as you're supporting the show. So if you want to do that,
the yearly
great.
Is kind of like if you want Patreon benefits, which include the Discord for a one-time. It's essentially that. Obviously, you'd have to re-up next year, but you've got a lot of control over that.
Yeah.
The monthly, we get a little bit more, but it's honestly...
It's pennies at that point. And really, the reason...
It benefits us more for you to give in a way that's more comfortable
yes.
than anything else.
The reason why we were pushing the year-long subscription so much was because of the fundraiser for London. So
Yeah.
that's what that was all about. So, but either way is totally fine. We really do appreciate it. Other ways you can support us is over at paypal.me/Norse Code as well. You can check that out if you'd like to make a one-time donation. Or you can be one of the fine people who go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up any number of items, including throw pillows, cups, notebooks, stickers, and shower curtains. Socks. The Wreath socks are definitely still in stock over at Threadless. So check that out when you get a chance. All right, let's get into the show. We absolutely had to do a show this week because a number of roster moves happened. It was the opening of free agency. First the non-legal tampering, then the legal tampering, and now everything is busted wide open. First person we want to talk about is Adam Thielen, who is no longer a Minnesota Viking, has decided to attempt to be a number one receiver somewhere. This was absolutely expected. And it appears he has a date with the Carolina Panthers. Whether or not that works out is for a future episode. But it looks like Adam Thielen is not going to be a Minnesota Viking after all.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like there were some kind of efforts, right? Kind of like a lip service of an effort to get it, get something worked out between the two that would allow Thielen to stay under a number, with a payout that he would like, under a number that the Vikings would like for cap purposes. But I think it was kind of like everyone kind of knew, right, that they were not going to be able to reach an agreement that was going to make both sides pretty happy, and so they released Adam Thielen. I don't think Thielen is really all that upset about it. It produces for the Vikings about $6.4 million in dead money, which means there's a net savings of $13.6 million, which, of course, the Vikings were up against the cap. That kind of makes a lot of sense. But to kind of talk about Thielen and his impact as a receiver, just like real quick in terms of like X's and O's, I was pretty consistent all year in saying that I thought Thielen was playing a lot better than his production implied. Obviously, when Hawkinson arrived and he started, generating yards kind of right away, about 50 yards a game, it kind of brings up the question, like, why couldn't Thielen even do that if he's as open, as I thought, right? Why wouldn't it happen? But I think a lot of that just has to do with the way the offense is designed and the progressions and so forth. I thought Thielen was getting open. I thought that he was playing well. I thought that he had clearly lost a step, and I think that the role that they put him in the offense allowed him to showcase that he was open often enough for him to be kind of a number two receiver. And obviously the Vikings didn't really have space in an offense where the number two receiver was going to be where he is in the progression and wasn't going to get that many yards. So makes a ton of sense. I don't think that this was a problem with Thielen's skill set. If anything, I think the offense was doing a great job of accommodating him being open and crafting kind of the most efficient system. But I wouldn't be surprised if he landed somewhere for obviously not like a ton of money, but something around 6-7 million a year, I think is probably, maybe 5 is probably where he's going to end up. I think that he'd be a good complementary receiver somewhere.
So he will regress on touchdowns somewhere else next year.
Yeah, positively.
Positive
regression.
Positive regression? Is that?
Yeah, towards his mean.
Okay, that's what it is. Thielen was a special character, and we don't need to go over all of his history. Anyone who listens to the show is very familiar with his entire story. If you're a Vikings fan, even like casually, you're aware of what he's meant as far as the state of Minnesota and all of that, playing for the Vikings. So he was a great story. I imagine that this is something that he seems like the sort of player that will end up being like a goodwill ambassador later, like somebody that they like bring out for things. He seems like that sort of former player.
Yeah, I think his entire career, we just kind of like, this is a Ring of Honor guy, right? It was never like this guy's going to the Hall of Fame. And during those 8 games where he's pulling in consecutive 100-yard seasons, like maybe, but I don't think even then people were talking about it like, well, if he keeps up this pace, he's a Hall of Famer. I think people were like, wow, this is incredible. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. Anyway.
I think it became something like that. He's somebody to be celebrated. The man is responsible for he's been on the field for a number of great moments. I think my personal favorite catch of his is still the playoff game, the bomb to him against the Saints, where he does that basket catch to like the 2-yard line.
Yeah.
I think that might be my favorite outside of the soccer celebration.
The soccer celebration was phenomenal. That was incredible. Yeah, I mean, one of the first stories that I wrote that ever blew up, like ever, was on Adam Thielen. He was a practice squad guy. I mean, he hadn't been a practice squad guy yet because it was 2013 training camp. But I was like, might as well talk. I mean, first of all, I'm writing for like a blog, the Daily Norseman. It had just gotten access to training camp, right? Like it's difficult to describe how difficult it was to get access because back then blogs, internet-only publications weren't like a thing, right? Like The Athletic did not exist. A lot of these internet publications did not exist. I don't think like Grantland had just started, right? And so it's like 2-3 years in, but Grantland was attached to ESPN. So if they wanted credentials, which they didn't really need because they were doing long form stuff, they would get ESPN credentials, right? So it was traditional media. And so it was really difficult to get like quote unquote into training camp with a credential. And once you're there, it's like really difficult to secure like an interview with the player, right? Like, you know, you're not going to get a one-on-one with a quarterback, right? Like, you know, the Star Tribune might be able to put in a request. And if the Vikings are feeling it, they could say, hey, we're going to set aside, an hour for you to have a conversation with like Christian Ponder, right? And then you can do your feature piece. You know, that wasn't going to happen for me. So I needed to figure out who I was going to talk to that was still an interesting story. And Adam Thielen made perfect sense. I looked him up on DraftScout, which I think at the time was NFLDraftScout.com. And I saw that at the regional combine, he ran a 4.42, which I believe if you look now, it's been changed to a 4.45. I don't know why that is. But I was like, whoa, that's like pretty fast, and, he ran like a ridiculous 3 cone. He had like really great workouts. And I know that the regional combine process produces very, very few great workouts. More people are signed from regional combines than people that have great workouts. Like it's just pretty rare. So I thought that was interesting. I looked up his stats at Minnesota State Mankato. They were not that good. And so I was like, I got to talk to this guy. Right. And so I had a conversation with him. He was magnanimous with his time, which, all credit to Adam Thielen. I will say practice squad guys, bubble guys are always magnanimous with their time. They're always kind of willing to talk unless they've got like a meeting or something that they obviously cannot afford to be late to. But I was like, yeah, this guy like wasn't an undrafted free agent. He was a tryout. I got to talk to him. So I talked to him and the story ends up, actually, I feel like I can say this now because it's not really a knock on anybody. But I was kind of scared to talk about it at the time when I had noticed it. The story ends up making the rounds on Twitter, which is really cool. And the headline was, I've been hearing it my whole life. Because I asked, like, hey, was anyone surprised that he ran a 4.42? And because I was just like, he's a white guy who ran a 4.42. Not a lot of people think that he's athletic. He's like sneaky athletic, right? He like gets open because he's crafty. And here's the secret about Adam Thielen in 2013. The reason that he didn't make the roster, the reason he had to go on the practice squad is because he was technically speaking a very poor receiver. He was running pretty poor routes, obviously better than a lot of players, but pretty poor routes. And he could not catch the ball to save his life, which is night and day from the way we remember him as a player, right? But in camp, he wasn't that guy. He was more an athlete than he was a technician. And so I was like, this is not like, this is not the Brian Hartlines of the world, right? And so, I'm asking, and he was like, I've been hearing it my whole life. And I was like, that's the quote right there. That's money. So that's the headline. I made that the headline. It got picked up, and a lot of people were excited. And obviously, the scrappy white guy receiver that's been popular on every NFL franchise for every fan base ever. And it got picked up and turned around, but it did get picked up. And this is the part I never wanted to share before, but it's nobody's fault, right? It got picked up by a white supremacist forum. I don't even know. I've told you this. No, I haven't. Okay,
I don't believe so. This is the first time I'm hearing this.
Yeah. Well, it's 'cause I don't want to tell people like, hey, I wrote a story
or part of
that white supremacists really loved. Like that's weird. Like, why? I'm not proud of that, but it's weird. It's a story, right?
I do enjoy that it's a pillar of your success. A group that you've
I
constantly
probably got like 10, 15 views. Like it doesn't comprise a sizable percentage. But
yeah, they later all unfollowed you because of what happened with the whole Kiwi Farms thing. But we'll talk about that later.
Well, because I was checking the back, because you're your first time writer, a story picks up. I was checking all of the backlinks, right? I was doing the thing you're never supposed to do, which is not only was I reading the comments of the story itself, which they were positive, right? It was great. People were really receptive, but I was checking all of the backlinks and all of the comments on the backlinks because you could see all the referral traffic, right? And so I went through. I was like, oh, this one's from Twitter. This one's from like this like roundup. This one's from this. And I'm reading, and it's like not many people are commenting on the article itself because it's mostly just kind of a throwaway link. I'm going to some forums and I'm reading what people are saying in the forums. And one of them was a white supremacist forum, and they were like, people like him never get a chance in today's NFL, and it was like a lot of stuff. It's some crazy like super racist stuff. I'm not going to repeat. Like my people have been racist to me all my life, and my mind was like blown. Right? I was like, oh wow, this is wild. Like the words you're using are words I had to look up. That's new, right? And mind you, in college, right? In college, I had friends that would, and I'll admit it, I was on 4chan sometimes, right? I was just trying to see what was happening, right? So it wasn't like I was new to internet racism. I considered myself an old hat at that point, and all of the crazy words people came up with to be racist. And I learned a lot that day.
So
that was the first article I wrote that ever blew up.
To the
yeah. And that's not how I remember Adam Thielen. But when I say, "Hey, this is the first article that like blew up," then I go on to remember. Oh yeah, but I mean, it was like really cool because he continued to be like he remembered that article I wrote for a while, and he continued to be really cool to me about that for probably forever, really. Like he didn't stop being cool about it, but it like the impact that article had versus the impact of like the rest of my journalistic career kind of they faded relative, right? But I mean that like to me his career in Minnesota is in a big way tied to my career as a writer. I remember arguing with people on Twitter over whether or not he should make the roster in 2014, because I remember there was this 6'5" Florida State receiver named Rodney Smith, which there's been a bunch of guys named Rodney Smith that have played football. But this one's from Florida State. He had like 200 yards there, so he's like an undrafted free agent. And I was arguing that Adam Thielen, 100%, no question, should make the roster over Rodney Smith. And I was arguing with a lot of people about this who were like, well, you got to pick the more talented guy. And I was like, what does talented mean to you? I'm picking the guy that's getting open and catching the ball. That's talent, right? You're picking a 6'5" guy that ran a 4.5. Come on. And it's not like, and like people were talking about Thielen like he was unathletic. And I was like, I already wrote about this. He's an athlete. So it was like, yeah, it was like a big part of the beginning of my career. A lot of that has to do with stories like Adam Thielen. So I'm going to remember that dude forever. But also the one thing as well.
Well,
I've never told that story before. So I figured now's a time. So I spent a long time on the podcast telling that particular story.
Now is a time. Yes.
Yeah.
It's the off season.
I was so afraid because I was like, Adam Thielen doesn't deserve it. I don't want a reputation for making white supremacists happy. And now I'm just at the well, that's nobody's fault.
On this day,
right?
Made the white supremacist hearts go 3 sizes.
Look, if we're keeping a scoreboard, I am way ahead. So,
well, I mean that is fair. The next person that was let go is Eric Kendricks, and while not a complete shock, it is something that it's sad to see Eric Kendricks go. Eric Kendricks famously not only was a good player, but had a lot to do with the social issue kind of push for the Minnesota Vikings, especially in 2020.
Oh yeah, I mean. So someone asked me someone from the Chargers beat asked me like, hey, what do you know about Eric Kendricks? Like, what do you want to is there anything you can share? And I just like couldn't stop typing, so I sent him like a wall of text. But the bottom part is probably the part that I think is really cool for me. So yeah, this is who he is technically, and we could talk about that for a second for sure. But the thing that stands out to me, of course, is kind of the person that he is, because I think that he became more of a personality in Minnesota instead of just like a good player that, you know, we kind of gathered the rest of the locker room respected. We were able to, he opens up and then we can talk to him a little bit more, and so forth. So this is what I told this guy. So from a character and locker room standpoint, I don't think there was anyone who's better for the Vikings. Elite character, elite locker room guy, incredible leader in there, even when the roster was full of leaders. People like Brian Robinson, Harrison Smith, Kevin Williams, so on. You never know how good a guy is off the field, so I can't speak to the totality of that, but what I saw off the field was tremendous. Cares a lot about community, and I suspect that was a big reason he returned to Los Angeles. His charity work, I believe, was split between Los Angeles and Minnesota, just like with Anthony Barr. He's usually quiet, but has become more vocal recently. You can tell how emotional he can get about this stuff, and I think that's a huge positive. I remember when I asked him about, you know, this probably being the last year that he was going to play with Anthony Barr, he became really emotional, and I thought that was really it's really touching, right? Because like we're covering this like it's an industry. We're talking about X's and O's. We're going to be talking about contracts a lot, and moving numbers around and making the accounting work. And it's really cool to be reminded that these are like dudes that care for each other a lot. And I think Kendricks, one reason that he didn't speak out a ton early on in Minnesota is that he's the kind of guy, from my read, right, which very limited perspective, right? But from my read, wears his heart on his sleeve. And so if he begins to open up, he's just going to be who he is. And so it's going to be difficult for him to kind of be comfortable doing that. And once he was, I think we got a lot of great moments. He was really concerned about making sure that, like, during, for example, the George Floyd protest, that like people were fed. Like it was really important to him to find ways to make sure that people were fed. And so he reached out to a ton of people to try and make sure that, and so that's the kind of guy he is. Now, in terms of the impact on the field, right? I don't love this cut. I get it because it saves $9.5 million total against the salary cap. The Vikings only incur $1.9 million in dead cap space, so the net savings are almost $10 million. But that I think. I think there was probably a way to work out his contract to keep him, and I don't think the Vikings were all that interested in him. My take on it was that, you know, he had lost a step athletically in a lot of ways, and it looked like the thing that really made him stand out was like his instincts and ability to kind of diagnose plays, and it didn't look like that was there last year. To me, that was a product of coaching. Now, the Vikings let go their defensive coordinator and their linebackers coach, their inside linebackers coach. So it felt like the Vikings agreed that coaching was subpar in some way, and it still wasn't enough for them to kind of buy into Kendricks as a player. And I don't know if I agree with that. Obviously, the Vikings have a lot more access to information that they need to make this kind of decision, right? In terms of how he's reading, what he's being asked to do, what his keys are, and how he's responding to that, how he responds to coaching, good or bad, right? They have a lot more information, so it makes more sense to think maybe there wasn't something there, but it's very difficult for me to kind of wrap my head around this being a great move instead of like a restructure, because I think that he's still a very good linebacker. The cliff that he had to have fallen off for that to be 100% related to his talent, that defies a lot of belief for me. And players do fall off cliffs, that happens, but like it would take a lot for me to believe that. And maybe a bad year in Los Angeles would do that, but that one was an interesting one to me.
So Kendricks is not on the team anymore. He was picked up by the Chargers. And Cameron Dantzler, a little bit of a surprise, I suppose. Cornerback was also cut.
Yeah. That one, curious just because, like, hey, he's on a rookie contract and he's not even a first-round pick. And so as depth, I mean, it seems like he plays well enough to be depth. Why did they let him go? I don't know. I think from a pure numbers versus value perspective, yeah, I agree. The Vikings save about $2.7 million against the cap doing this. Okay, that you would pay that much for a cornerback that's like your cornerback 3 or 4, right? But, you know, it's not. And I think that there's probably something else involved here, whether it is an unwillingness to kind of trust his ability to get up to an appropriate NFL weight while still, having the athleticism he needs to play. Or it could be related to, he had to leave for personal issues, near the end of the season. It could be related to something involving that. I don't know. I hope everything's okay with him. But I suspect that there is something else at play because the Vikings definitely have room in the cornerback meeting room for Cameron Dantzler, right? They don't have enough cornerbacks on the roster. They still don't after signing somebody. But and that was probably pretty good value for what you were going to get from him. So I think that there is something else. I don't know what the full story is. I'm not going to profess to know, but I think that there might be, maybe it was, how he took to coaching. Maybe it was something in meeting rooms. Maybe it was something kind of off the field. Maybe it had to do with his inability to make conditioning or whatever, right? I don't know. There's any number of things, some of which might impugn his character, some of which might not. So I don't want to speculate too much, but I think that there is something aside from the value versus return proposition you're getting from him.
So that's it for the main cuts. Let's talk some restructures. The first person I want to talk about is Kirk Cousins, because his restructure on his contract confused a lot of people. And Luke Braun attempted to explain it using his rabbits and beans.
Yeah. Luke Beans, right? Legume Luke tried to explain it, and one of the first responses he got was "You don't know ball," which is amazing.
Like, you can say a lot of things about Luke Braun. You can't necessarily say that.
Well, like, okay, fine. He never played the game. Great.
I mean, it'd be one thing if you
were...
very
much to do with, like, the contract situation he's outlined.
Well, yeah, it'd be different if you were replying to one of his posts saying that. Like,
right, yeah.
That would just be funny. This guy was actually serious.
Yeah, he was serious, and it's like, frankly, this has nothing to do with ball. I'm sorry. This is not a ball conversation. We're accounting. And Luke did kind of a funny joke with bean counting, right? I'm not going to give him all the credit in the world. I think he just had beans on hand, but bean counting, right? Perfect. It's okay. So what a signing bonus conversion does, and I've explained this a couple of times in the podcast, but the additional details about this were a little bit confusing because you're adding on top of the signing bonus thing. But when a player signs a signing bonus on a new deal, right, that signing bonus does not count against the cap, right? Otherwise, it would be untenable to do signing bonuses because everybody's first year cap would be $40 million, right? It just isn't possible. So the way the rules are structured is that the impact of that signing bonus is spread out over the lifetime of the contract or the first 5 years of the contract, right? Whichever shorter. And so you take a signing. So you have a signing bonus for $10 million on a 5-year contract. Each year, you will incur a $2 million cap hit as a result of that signing bonus. Okay, I think that's pretty understandable. What Luke is trying to explain is that that's already happened with Kirk, and so there are some elements multiple times. So there are some years where you're already taking into account a signing cap bonus hit, and they're different because he signed multiple signing bonuses as he signed multiple extensions. And so some years have a higher signing bonus hit than others. The key here is that Kirk has already been paid all of that money. All we're doing is moving the money around for accounting purposes, right? And so if he signs a signing bonus 3 years ago on a 5-year deal, let's say, then that gets spread out over 5 years. And then he signs a new deal 3 years into the contract, right? So he signs an extension today. There's still 2 years left on the proration, which is what it's called when you split up the signing bonus, of the previous signing bonus. That doesn't go away. Remember, he's already been paid. You need to account for. So that doesn't go away. All that happens is that sticks there, those 2 years, and now the new 5 years is put on top of it. So now what the Vikings did is they didn't actually extend Cousins, or let's just say they did. They extended Cousins with the caveat that they're going to cut him. So what they did is they signed him to a 4-year contract. So they gave him a $20 million signing bonus. They took his roster bonus, turned it into a signing bonus. And they're like, hey, you were going to make a bunch of money when you made the roster. Now that's a signing bonus. You get that today. What that does is it allows us to split this out over the lifetime of the contract. The contract was 3 years. Now it's 5 years or whatever. Or the contract was 2 years. Now it's 4 years, right? So the signing bonus gets spread out over the course of the next 4 years. So Kirk Cousins converts $20 million into signing bonus. They add 2 years to the contract. And so that gets split out and saves $16 million against the cap because you're only taking, 1/5 of that this year. So you take 20 million divided by 5, that's 4. You're taking that this year. So the other 16 million gets spread out into future years. And then in the contract, there's a clause that says on the first day of the league year, you get cut. And so there are years on his contract where he makes a salary, that he has an official salary those years, and the contract says you have to take a cap hit for a signing bonus, but then those years never actualize. They get automatically cut. And so you take the dead hit from all of that because any guaranteed money that you have left, whether it's signing bonus that's accounting or a future guarantee, because that player is going to make that money anyway, all of that accelerates into the year that player is cut. And because he's automatically cut next year because of a void in the contract, that's what the void is, all of that signing bonus is now it was spread out over the next 4 years, and that's going to come back. And so any unaccounted for signing bonus and any unpaid guarantees are now accounted against the cap. So in 2024, the Vikings will not have Kirk Cousins, but will have to account for $28 million in dead cap space. He's not getting paid that money. He's already been paid that money, but they have to account for it in the cap. And when a player is no longer on your roster, that accounting occurs, except in one certain circumstance, the year after he's no longer on the roster. So that's all that means. Luke Braun still does not know ball.
It's important to include that last bit. Harrison Smith, who is an absolute first ballot Hall of Famer for Norse Code, after his response to Chris Thomason, also agreed to a restructure. Harrison Smith will be returning for next year.
Yeah. Same thing. He converted a roster bonus into a signing bonus. All of that before. But the thing that matters here is not that. I mean, yeah, it's great that they saved $6 million in cap space. They turned $8 million into a 4-year signing bonus. Great. Cool. The thing that matters is that before this was announced, intrepid reporter Chris Thomason, recently of the Pioneer Press, and technically still has articles being printed on the Pioneer Press, who has now sought a new job in the Denver media market. I believe it's for the Denver Post. I'm not 100% sure.
Considering he said that it involves Woody Page, Denver Post is where Woody Page is at.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. Before he did that, he texted Harrison Smith a question about whether or not he was staying in Minnesota, right? Because he was a roster cut candidate. You might as well ask him. And Harrison Smith sends back no caption, no text, just a picture of Prince.
A very disinterested picture of Prince.
Well, I mean, most pictures of Prince. But yes, that's important to point out that this was one of the many pictures of Prince where he looks disinterested. Thomason, ever the intrepid reporter, striving for accuracy and clarity so that he can report with all of the alacrity he needs, texts back, "Hey, Prince is a Minnesota icon. Does that mean you're back?" And he did not receive a reply.
This is the same fellow who, if you recall correctly, live tweeted a funeral once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. He strives for specificity in his reporting.
Well, he got it there. So anyway, Harrison Smith is back, and apparently on his Instagram, posted a picture of that Prince picture and included Hitman on the hat, which I think needs to be a giveaway for next season.
Yeah, it's perfect.
There was one more restructure, but we don't have any details on it. Jordan Hicks apparently restructured, but we know nothing.
It was announced 3 days ago as of this recording, and there's no details on it. The Vikings, before this Harrison Smith restructure, were on overthecap.com, were $2 million over the cap. That doesn't mean that they were over the cap. The problem is that when you're working with like, these deadlines that occur, to the minute, the information that the NFL has in order to make somebody cap compliant versus the information that we have to make somebody cap compliant, it's different, right? And so it's just not publicly available. It sounds like it's been executed, but it hasn't showed up on a transaction report, or the details have not been leaked, or it hasn't been filed with the NFLPA yet, or any number of other things. We don't know what it is, but I suspect this is the reason that the Vikings did not violate league rules on March 15th when they appeared to be over the cap. But yeah, we don't know what the details are. He had a dead cap hit of about $1 million if they cut him. So they would save $5 million by cutting him, because he was on a $6 million deal essentially. And it is possible that it's not a restructure in the same sense that, the other restructures were, converting money that this person was guaranteed to get. Well, I shouldn't say guaranteed. Harrison Smith was not going to get the roster bonus, but was going to get if he had stayed on the roster and turning into a signing. He might have just taken a straight up pay cut. That could have happened, right? Because he didn't play well last year. He was a cut candidate. He doesn't have a lot of leverage. There's a lot of linebackers on the market. Aside from essentially the top two linebackers, they weren't making a ton of money, which we'll talk about in a second when we get to one of the mailbag questions. But yeah, so it's a restructure or a pay cut or something, but it's saved cap. I probably would have preferred to restructure Eric Kendricks and then cut Jordan Hicks and then use that $5 million to account for some element of the restructured Eric Kendricks contract.
Well, let's go to our signings, because there were three big ones here. The first one that came out was Josh Oliver, who's a tight end. And it didn't make a ton of sense for like a blocking tight end to be signed. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the fourth tight end that Kwesi has brought in.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's a good way. I didn't really think about that. Well, but like most of the tight ends, aside from like Hawkinson, were like not tight ends that you expected like the world out of, right? But yeah, I mean, he brings in Johnny Munt. That was more of a Kevin O'Connell thing, drafted Nick Muse. Josh Oliver, coming out of college, by the way, was seen as a receiving tight end. Ran a great 40, had pretty good receiving statistics as a tight end, got injured, I think, 2 years in a row in Jacksonville, I want to say. Becomes the third tight end for Baltimore, who, of course, they've got like Mark Andrews, plus they always have some veteran tight end that's been on the roster for 40 years. And then Josh Oliver was the third guy. So only saw 40% of snaps, which I think is a lot for a third tight end, but not a lot for a guy that, nominally signs to a $7 million deal. It kind of reminded a lot of people. I don't know if anyone said this, but it reminded me, and the way people were talking about it reminded me of who's the Arizona Cardinals tight end that they signed way back when, where they gave him the offer and the guy doesn't even go on the plane. He's another Notre Dame tight end right before Kyle Rudolph. Let me see if I can find it on the Minnesota Vikings archive depth chart. Way back in 2013. John Carlson. That's it.
That's the one.
Yeah. And he was signed, I think, at the time for a $5 million deal, which, if as a percentage of cap, was actually a larger percentage of cap than this Josh Oliver one is, if you only look at his average. And he had one productive season. The difference, of course, is that one productive season was not the year the Vikings was not the year before the Vikings signed him, but several years prior. And so he had not, been productive for a while, but the bones were there, right? There's something there where he could be productive. I don't know, but I feel like it was kind of reminiscent of that. But I think that there's a couple of differences here. One, Josh Oliver was the best blocking tight end in the NFL last year. I'm a huge passing matters more than running. You should prioritize the passing game. Most of your dollars should go towards the passing game, but also you should probably not test the limits of how bad you could be at running the ball and get away with it, right? Because when it comes to NFL performance, there is no floor, right? There's kind of a ceiling. You could always get worse, right? That's like one of the mantras of the show. You could always get worse. In running the ball, you could always do worse. So you don't want to be at that bottom level where running the ball is a non-entity, where you have to pass the ball every single down. That's not going to be efficient. No analytics person on the planet who is like into football analytics thinks that teams should pass 100% of the time, right? That is just kind of, they should pass much more often. And the persistence with which they make that point makes people think that, oh, you should just pass the ball all the time. You want to be good at running the ball, and you want to be good at running, and choose to devote some cap dollars to that. The Vikings, it very much looks like, will transition from a 3 wide receiver offense to a 2 tight end offense, or at least will mix it up a lot more. And so we're going to kind of see what that means. But Josh Oliver primarily will be a blocking guy, but he still has a lot of the speed that made him an interesting draft prospect for the Jaguars way back. So they might find ways to involve him in the receiving game. You know, this sometimes just happens, right? Where a guy becomes like some blocker. That's what he's known for, but he always had kind of that ability to be a receiving guy. So we'll see kind of what they engineer around that. Ron Johnson on the Minnesota Football Party was describing essentially the dynamic that the Patriots were able to craft when they put together probably the most relevant schematically 2 tight end offense over the past 20 years, which is the one, of course, with Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski. It's tough because you have to acknowledge, Aaron Hernandez, he's the guy that killed a bunch of people. But yeah, he was a good football player. So for the purposes of this discussion, that's the thing that we're going to talk about. They had a situation where they had 2 tight ends that were very good at blocking and 2 tight ends that were very good at receiving, and one that also happened to be very good at running the ball in Hernandez. And so what they would do is they would force the defense to kind of declare what they were going to defend, essentially, and then they would do the other thing, right? Oh, okay, you're concerned that Rob Gronkowski is going to go downfield and catch the ball, so you put out another defensive back. You're a nickel against our 2 tight ends. We're going to run the ball. Now you've noticed that we're running the ball in 2 tight end sets. You've got another linebacker out there. That linebacker is no match for Hernandez. So we're going to throw the ball, right? Or you have seen that with 2 tight ends, we're much more likely to run to the strong side. Okay, well, Aaron Hernandez is going to orbit motion and he's going to run the ball. Like, it was like that, right? And Johnson is describing essentially the same thing, is that forcing the defense to always be wrong is kind of the element that the Vikings might be going for here with a 2 tight end offense. This has been explained to Minnesota fans a number of times, mansplained even, to Minnesota fans. That's a joke for the Patreon. To a number of fans over the years, because the Vikings have always tried a 2 tight end offense and it has always gone somewhat poorly, because it turns out very often the 2 tight end offense is just a worse 3 wide receiver offense. It's just the tight ends are not phenomenal at blocking, and they don't create an advantage against a linebacker when it comes to blocking, and they're not good enough at receiving to replace a slot receiver. The slot receiver nickel matchup is typically better than the tight end linebacker matchup. So it doesn't always work out. But that it will be the idea, potentially, is that the tight ends here are now good enough for that to be the case. We'll see. But I think it is a transition in the offense. The thing that people are upset about is the $7 million average. And I tweeted out something from a personnel and analytics guy that has consulted with both NCAA and NFL teams, that he expected a $13 million average for Josh Oliver because of how good Josh Oliver is. And a bunch of people thought that was not credible. Not that I didn't talk to this guy, but rather that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I respect the guy a lot. I think that he knows what he's talking about. He can be kind of a little bit off the wall sometimes. Sometimes I get to see his position rankings and they don't really match what I do. And so I don't think the $13 million is something I agree with, but it makes sense that somebody with an ear towards NFL front offices might see the best blocking tight end in football and might project an average that's much higher. Now, what he does is he projects a percentage of the cap and then converts it back to dollars, right? So he probably sees something closer to the John Carlson deal we just talked about, right? And then has converted it into 2023 cap dollars, right? And so the number sounds kind of absurd. But the point here is not that he would take up a $13 million hit. It would be that the average over the lifetime of the contract would be 13. And this is important because the Vikings contract of $7 million for this guy on average really got people upset because it's a lot of cap money to devote to somebody. But you just take a look at the deal. Oliver will count against the cap $3.5 million this year, and there's not a ton guaranteed. So if it does not work out, right? If he's just not that great of a tight end to add, if he's a 1-year wonder as a blocker, and he doesn't have the ability to contribute to the offense in a meaningful way, the Vikings can be out of it in 2024 I thought originally they'd be out of it in 2025 and they have to absorb the 2024 contract. No, the 2024 cap hit is $7 million. So it's $3.5 million this year. Next year, $7 million, but there's only $1.5 million guaranteed. So they can just cut him pretty easily. Like, he doesn't have a ton of leverage in that situation. So it is a 1 year, $3.5 million contract with a team option. If you think of it that way, I think it's a really good deal. So I think people should stop freaking out about this, because this guy's really good at what he does. What he does is pretty important to the Vikings because they're one of the worst teams at running the ball in the NFL right now. And you need to be good at running the ball. You much more need to be good at passing the ball, but you do need to be good at running the ball. So it's not efficient. It's been getting more efficient in the NFL the past couple of years, something to keep in mind. But because you have to run the ball, you might as well be not the least efficient team in the league at running.
A lot of people are pointing to his signing as a sign that it's time for Ham to go. Do you believe this to be the case?
I mean, Oliver only cost $3.5 million against the cap this year, so it is not as onerous against the cap. I am curious, but the Vikings have not made a move. I think that they would have made a move by now. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. They could before we get to training camp and just say, "Hey, we're trying to design ways to make all of this work," and it isn't worth it, right? Because a 2 running back, 2 tight end set, I don't know. It's kind of nice because now Justin Jefferson is isolated. He's the lone one on the field. You've got a heavy box. Maybe you could do something about it. But maybe this all doesn't work together and they'll release Ham later. But to me, the fact that they haven't made a move since the start of free agency on CJ Ham tells me at this point it's more likely than not that he's on the roster in September. If you had asked me the moment Oliver was signed, or it was announced right before the start of free agency, that what would happen to Ham, I would say he's probably not going to be there. Yeah, you're probably going to cut him. I would have said that. But now that we're past like how with a missing person, the first 72 hours are basically all that matter, and after that, your odds of finding someone are much lower. I think when it comes to roster cuts, the first 48 hours matter the most in terms of trying to figure out whether or not somebody is going to end up being on the roster. And I think that that's true here with CJ Ham, is that after you clear kind of the danger time period, yeah, there's a chance, right? But it is a lot smaller than it was at the beginning of this whole process. So they might do a 2 running back, 2 tight end offense sometimes, or at least have sets available because they see Ham as a multi-capable guy.
Well, the next person we should talk about is Marcus Davenport, who was a linebacker from the Saints, and that looks real interesting.
It's interesting. I don't like it, but I'm very open to being wrong about this one. On the spreadsheet, right? At least the analytics spreadsheet, not the box score spreadsheet. I would argue that he probably looks like a decent signing, right? From an analytics perspective. Yeah, he only had half a sack last year. That's pretty alarming. But his pressure rate was decent. His pass rush win rate was decent. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't top 10, right? But it was pretty decent. And that is more likely to predict future performance. He's known to be pretty good against the run. He's a super athlete. We saw him test at the combine. We saw how he did against lesser athletes at the Senior Bowl. The Saints traded a first-round pick to get him. I'm sure they regret it, but like that was the talent that they saw. On paper, it seems like an interesting signing. In practice, I'm not so sure. He looked slow. You watch how he played last year. He looks more like a defensive tackle than an edge rusher. He's not a great pass rusher from that perspective. Most of the time when you see somebody with a high pressure rate and a low sack rate, most of the time it's kind of meaningless. Most of the time that will even out over time, and vice versa, right? If you've got a high sack rate and a low pressure rate. But there are instances where that never happens. Chandler Jones is a good instance where you have a high sack rate and a relatively low pressure rate. Brian Robinson is a good example of a high pressure rate, low sack rate. Same with Brandon Graham. That happens consistently to some players. And it can be an issue with finishing. It can be an issue with burst. It can be an issue with how pressure appears, right? Because if opponents are holding onto the ball a little bit longer, your pressure rate's going to be a little bit higher. Not because you're better, but because they're holding onto the ball. Maybe your quarterbacks are better, and now you're getting pressure because they have to hold on to the ball. So that's not dispositive. And what I'm seeing is a player that he showed up to training camp 300 pounds, right? He was at the combine at 280 pounds, I want to say. And his playing weight for most of the year was around 260. So he's 300 pounds. This is a guy that before, and I'll get into why this will be a positive in a second, but this is a guy that struggles to get up to 280 generally, right? In previous years, he'd struggled to maintain a playing weight close to 280. And so he'd play closer to 260. But this year was playing at 300 and had difficulty playing below 300. And he looked like it. He did not look in shape. He did not look like a guy you watch like Kevin Williams at 300 pounds. You're like, that dude can move. You watch this guy at 300 pounds. You're like, I don't know. I'm not seeing it. Right. So that was my concern. And the reason, and maybe this is a reason to be optimistic, is that he was recovering from injury. And so it was difficult for him to do the workouts he needed to do in order to kind of maintain his conditioning and his athleticism. It probably contributed to his weight gain because he probably was eating the diet that he was eating to try and get up from 260 to 280 and doing less because his injuries limited his ability to work out. So you would just gain weight, right? So it could be that without an injury, he comes into camp, rocked up, looking like he did as a rookie, weighing, 270 pounds, whatever the Vikings want him to weigh, and as athletic as they need him to be. That could be the case. The other side of it is that he has never had a season where he's played more than 600 snaps, ever. I think his rookie year was primarily because he was super raw. He was like the first round draft pick in Texas San Antonio's history. He was just not an athlete that, you would be able to convincingly play full-time day one. So he's a developmental guy. So, that's initially the reason. But he's been injured basically every year, and it's kept him off the field. And so I don't know that these are disconnected things. So, yeah, it is. I don't love the signing. It's a 1-year signing for $13 million. You cannot get around. You can in some ways, I should say, but there's not a lot of ways to get around that hit unless there are some void years that we have not been informed about that spread out this contract, which is going to make 2024 pretty difficult, or not likely to be earned incentives. For example, he could have and Luke mentioned this on the football party, he could have an incentive to get 1 sack. Because he did not get that sack last year, right? He had half a sack. Because he didn't get a sack last year, that would be an unlikely to be earned incentive in NFL contract language, which means it doesn't count against the cap this year, but he would receive that money when it happens, which would then, if he stays with the Vikings, have to be counted against the cap next year. Okay. If that's the case, that'd be nice if most of the contract was centered around that incentive, but from my understanding, it's not. So I don't love $13 million. It is a prove it deal, so it's not very risky, but I don't love it, but there are reasons to be happy with it. His performance prior to that injury was pretty good. I wouldn't say amazing, but like pretty good. He has a pretty high pressure rate. That's something you could look forward to, but what I saw was not encouraging.
So the last signing that we want to talk about is the new corner, Byron Murphy, who was signed from the Arizona Cardinals. That's not a terrible contract either.
Yeah, I think it averages about 11 a year. The first year, the cap hit is about $8.75 million. That's less than I thought that he would go for. And so I think that the Vikings got a good deal here. I think that fans are overrating him. Maybe that's fine. It's the offseason, right? But I thought he was pretty good, okay, in a set of responsibilities that matches what he would do for the Vikings, probably, under what we've seen from the Brian Flores defense, right? He played a lot of man coverage. That's something that he's used to. But to me, he really only ever became a corner that I would recognize as somebody that played pretty well last year. I think PFF has him with a longer history of higher level play. To me, that's not who he was. I don't think that he was playing at a very high level 2 years ago. I could obviously be wrong about that. But what I saw was not crazy encouraging. He has athletic limitations compared to other corners. He's not a burner, right? He's not going to be able to cover really fast receivers on deep routes very often. And I still think that he makes some mental errors, right? So he mostly is a pretty good corner that I think against high-level receivers probably suffers more than most pretty good corners, right? Like DJ Reed, for example, is a pretty good corner. He's not great against high-level receivers, but the difference between, say, him and Byron Murphy against those same receivers, I think is somewhat substantial. But at $8.75 million in cap hit, and he doesn't have a ton of guaranteed either. It's a 2-year deal, but the Vikings can just be out of it. They don't have to. They'll take some dead money, but it is not a lot, and so they can just be out of it if it doesn't work out. So an $8.75 million contract, I'll buy that. I think that's a good deal, but this definitely does not mean the Vikings are done at corner, nor do I think most people thought that, but I just don't think that this is something where you're like, we got our guy. I think this is something like, we got our DJ Reed, now we got to find our Sauce Gardner, right? Like, I think you're closer to that. Like, you know, I guess the Colts are kind of like, we have our Trevon Diggs, or the Cowboys, we have our Trevon Diggs, now we got to get our Stephon Gilmore, which is crazy to me because they both shadowed last year, so I don't know, but you know, it's one of those, like, we got our Antonio Cromartie, now we got to find our Darrelle Revis, right? That's more what it means to me. That's not bad at $8.75 million. The only reason I'm pushing back is just because a lot of people were like, this is a great corner, you know, we got our guy, this is going to be the guy that's going to help. And I don't know if I'm there, but certainly I would grade this as a positive for the Vikings, like a B+ or something like that. Like, this is a pretty good deal.
Well, let's get into some of the re-signings here, because there were a couple of question marks and a couple of, well, I guess they're going together then. Let's talk Alexander Mattison. This one kind of puzzled a few people and asks a bit about what's going to happen with Dalvin Cook.
Yeah. We had a bit of a discussion about this in the football party, but I don't know that we resolved it, and I don't know that we can. This seems to me like a deal. It's about $3.5 million on average. We don't know the structure yet. It's a 2-year deal, so the structure is not like crazy important unless there's void years. But this does not seem like a deal that you would sign if you're the Vikings, right? If you expected Dalvin Cook to be on your roster in the future, but nor is it a deal where you sign and expect this dude to be the guy, right? This does not look like a deal where Alexander Madison's taking over the starting job and they're sending off Dalvin Cook to who knows where, and now you're good at running back. This is definitely like this is a deal where you feel committed to the committee approach. If you're committed to the committee approach, I don't know that you're paying $14 million to Dalvin Cook. So I'm really curious about how this works out. I said a couple of days ago or a week ago that I thought that the trade market for Dalvin Cook is not as bad as you'd think, because how teams respond to the Christian McCaffrey stuff, and because the running backs on the market are pretty good but not great. So like Miles Sanders, Rashad Penny, for example, right? The problem is, since then, more running backs have appeared on the market, right? You got Ezekiel Elliott, who was cut. You've got Derrick Henry, who's demanded a trade. Austin Eckler, who's demanded a trade. Plus probably a couple other guys that want trades. And then teams that need a running back are good. The Eagles signed Rashad Penny. I believe the Panthers outright signed Miles Sanders. If not, they're hosting him right now. But I believe they signed him. And the Dolphins signed 2 running backs. They re-signed Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson. And so those are the guys that I thought might be trade targets, especially the Dolphins. Okay, well, now you've got fewer teams looking for a running back, and they've got more running backs than before. And so now I'm going to have to walk it back. I don't know that there is a market for him. So now what do the Vikings do? If they can only get a 6th-round pick for him, do you do it? Stephon Gilmore was only traded for a 5th. So, and I believe the reason that Gilmore was only traded for a 5th and Ramsey was only traded for a 3rd and a tight end, because this cornerback class is bonkers. And so you can just say, well, I can't trade you a 1st-round pick. I'll just draft a guy. I'll get Christian Gonzalez. He'll be a lot cheaper, right? So, it's a pretty decent running back class. If you like the Texas A&M back, if you like the Alabama back, obviously if you like the Texas back, right, and you're in a position to grab them, you go for that guy, right? If you like the Pitt back, you might wait a couple of rounds, you go for that guy. You don't have to pay a 3rd-round pick to get a starter that's like 27 or whatever. So, I don't know what to do with this, right? Because I feel like this is not, like, there are teams that have done this, like the Browns with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. By the way, Kareem Hunt, another running back that's just on the market. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt were both paid pretty well in Cleveland, so it is possible that you've got a committee back where they're both paid well, but that just seems kind of unlikely. So I'm curious to see how this goes.
So the rumor or the misconception out there is that Dalvin also hasn't been potentially traded because there's no way he could be doing anything as far as passing a physical because he just had surgery. Is that how that works?
No. like most trades are done with a physical, right? A lot of times that's because you are trading for a presumably healthy player. And if he's not healthy, that voids the trade. This has happened a couple of times where some team has hidden an injury from the team they're trading to, and the physical revealed it. It's like a basic conditioning test plus an exam. It's like they're not like conditioning, right? So you're not running a 40 or anything like that. But if people have traded for injured players and have waived the physical, that like happens. People not think that happened. That happens. Like Odell Beckham was traded with an injury. They waived the physical. It's just a thing that happens. So, that's part of the negotiation when you trade is waive the physical, at least for the shoulder, right? Anything that's not shoulder related, maybe you will be liable for. But shoulder, you already know about this. You're buying this good. This is like, I don't think that that's it. Maybe his trade market is depressed because he's coming off of surgery, but I don't think that the trade is not occurring because he would automatically fail a physical. I think that that's just, you can just waive that.
Do you think he did himself a disservice by getting the surgery right before the window opened?
He might have done himself a service, right? If he makes himself untradeable, Vikings owe him at least $7 million guaranteed. They might have to owe him the whole 14.
He might have. He might be playing that 4D chess that we keep hearing about. Greg Joseph is coming back along with our long snapper, Pro Bowl snapper, Andrew DePaula. So Andrew's back. Greg Joseph is back. They're together in this, clearly.
Yeah, and the punter's still there. So you've got your trio of specialists. Continuity, man. You love it. Everyone loves continuity. No one has any complaints.
Especially about Greg Joseph.
Right. No, they recognize that the continuity matters more.
His agent talking about how he has the most game-winning kicks in like a season. It's like, yeah.
Oh, come on.
Come on. Yes, but about that.
Yeah, it was because he had the most game-winning attempts. The Vikings only were in one-score games. Come on. I mean, he's an agent, right? Like it's his job. But
he is supposed to be the hype man. Also, the hype here kind of sucked because of some of the positions that the team was put into as a result of Greg Joseph's kicking. But
right. But actually, yes. But memorably, there was some game. Like I think that was 2 years ago, the Ravens game. But like memorably, there were some games where if he just made his kicks earlier, they wouldn't have had to rely on a game-winning kick. So, But it is not that big of a, like, people are upset because like he's back and he's the kicker. It's not that bad. It's like a 1 year, $2 million contract. So it's like they're not overpaying for him mostly. It just, how much does overpaying matter when you can only play one guy? It's not like you're going to replace him with the kicker you have on the bench, right? Like if it's now you don't have a kicker, right? Like that's it. So, I get it. Like, I'm not saying that like you shouldn't be upset or whatever. I get it. To me, I know that his field goal percentage was low. That doesn't really bother me because all of his misses last year were from 50 plus. He made every 40 minus kick in the season. So that doesn't really bother me. It's the extra points that really bother me. And like, if we were to construct like a true shooting percentage type of for kicks, right? Which the PFF grade basically does that. He moves out of the bottom 5 to the bottom 8. So, it's not as bad as you think. But it is bad. But it's not as bad.
He's bad enough where no one will touch him with a 10-foot pole in the hell leagues, except during the draft for laughs.
Right. But, because, I mean, if you got the last pick in the draft and you draft him, you can just cut him and grab a kicker off of waivers. So
no big deal. You just look like, I clank when I walk. I picked up Greg Joseph as my kicker. Like, yeah, fine. Kenny Willekes and Ben Ellefson also signed. And we have Garrett Bradbury and Nick Mullins as well coming back.
Yeah, Kenny Willekes, I don't know the details. I assume it's a relatively close to vet minimum contract. Ben Ellefson, I actually didn't expect him back with the Josh Oliver news because he's primarily a blocking tight end. I'm guessing it's also like a minimum, and you can probably cut him in training camp if it comes to that. If, your offense can't sustain a ton of tight ends or whatever. Those are cool. Willekes has been injured a lot, and so we haven't been able to see him, but, I don't expect him to make a big impact. It'd be kind of cool if he did. As for Nick Mullins, that's fine. It's the Vikings got him well below what I would consider market value for him. So relatively seasoned quarterback backups are going for about $5 to $8 million. I would put Nick Mullins in that category, I guess. Like Baker Mayfield went for 4, which I think is a great deal. I don't think Baker Mayfield's a good quarterback, but I think that's a great deal. Nick Mullins is a pretty good deal. I think that's $2 million. Good job. He's fine. So that's hard to get that at the backup. Like with Sean Mannion, I think was paid more. I think this guy probably is better than Sean Mannion. So cool. All right. Rock on. Garrett Bradbury. I don't know about rocking on, but it's not as bad as I thought. When the deal was initially announced, I was like $5.5 million, $5.75 million a year or whatever. I don't know. The center market is weird because the top centers are getting paid like $14 million or something like that, and like average centers are getting paid like $6 million. Like that is a crazy differential. And there's like 2 or 3 centers. It's not just Jason Kelce. It's like 2 or 3 centers that are there. So kind of wild, but he's not an average center to me. Now I know that his PFF grade was a lot better. I think it was like 13th in the NFL, depending on your cutoffs, right? I know his PFF grade was pretty good overall. I also know 2 things. One, and I know Eric Eager pushed back against that, and I'll talk about this in a second, about a different player. But I think it was about Jawan Taylor. One, you're probably more likely to regress to your career mean, which for Garrett Bradbury is one of the worst 3 centers in the NFL, than you are to replicate a breakout season. 2, I know what I saw. Like, this isn't like I don't trust PFF. I just trust my eyes, watch the tape. They don't know ball. They don't know the calls. It's more the way you can get a good grade sometimes in PFF does not always match the level of talent or value that you provide. It's just a quirk in grading. I think grades are a remarkably valuable tool. A good example, though, of this particular problem, and these are largely edge cases, I think it might apply to Bradbury, but a good example of this is Darrell Williams when he was the right tackle for the Panthers. Now, I don't know why they didn't put Taylor Moton at right tackle. I was a Taylor Moton stan. I still am. Looks like I was right. But Darrell Williams had a really high PFF grade for a right tackle, and then he did not get a very good deal in free agency when he went to the Bills. And also, he didn't play well when he went to the Bills. And the reason for that is because Darrell Williams made very, very few mistakes. That's why his grade is high. Well, hey, if he's making very few mistakes, doesn't that mean he's good? Isn't that the job of an offensive tackle? And yeah, that's true, except he wasn't put in a position where he could make mistakes because he always had tight end help. Always. And so his grade's pretty good because he's not giving up pressure. His grade's pretty good because he's not losing pass rush reps because he can't. He's not allowed to. There's a whole another player being assigned to help him out. Obviously, the dynamics change at center where you can't put a tight end there. As far as I know, Andy Reid would know better. I'm sure if you could, he would find out. But to the best of my knowledge, you can't. And I wouldn't argue that Ed Ingram was helping him out a lot. In fact, Ed Ingram probably made him look worse. But from what I saw, especially in pass protection, he was still very alarming. Now, he did play better than last year, but to me, he's still very alarming. So $5.5 million or whatever it was a year, the average, I did not love that because it was kind of functional starting center energy, right? Like Bradley Bozeman got $5.5 million, right? And he's the starting center, and Bozeman is better. And so I didn't love it. Then the contract details come out. It is essentially a 1-year, $2.6 million contract, You have an out in 2024 with very little dead space or dead cap that you have to worry about. Kind of a prove it deal with a team option, like the Josh Oliver deal. And like Josh Oliver, Garrett Bradbury has, according to most people and probably the Vikings, again, I didn't love what I saw, but according to most people, a useful year, right? Like if this guy is your starter, history aside, the year that he had, if that guy's your starter, you're all right. I would argue that the value that Bradbury put out last year over a replacement level center was more than $2.6 million. So if you get Bradbury from last year, you are getting value for that dollar, and the Vikings can figure out what kind of contract extension they want from there. So it went from a bad deal in my eyes to an all right deal. Again, this is kind of one thing, like it's kind of like with Greg Joseph, like, yeah, he's probably worth $2 million. The Vikings probably got value out of it, but you probably just want a different kicker. Like you probably just want, and maybe you're at the point where you probably want a better center. So even if the Vikings are getting positive value versus dollar for Bradbury, I don't think it's a good deal. I think it's probably just an okay deal because the ceiling's not very high to me. And if you just invested in a center, you'd be much, much better off. Offensive line is a weak link position. You're only as good as your worst offensive lineman. And so there's like some value calculation here that doesn't always take that into account. So it's not as bad as I thought. It's actually okay. And you could come away with like your cap savings could be used in more valuable positions. So that's where you get it back. But, hopefully they've got an idea of what they want to do with the position going forward.
Well, let's head over to the mailbag because their first question asks a really important one, I feel, albeit in his own weird way. Professor Poop asks, given the cuts to beloved vets combined with some fairly non-poopy signings, the question needs to be settled. As it stands today, are the Vikings a more poopy or less poopy team than they were on the fateful night they lost to the Giants?
I'm going to count the addition of Brian Flores. And when I count that, I think less poopy. Like, yeah, you lost Eric Kendricks, who I think could be valuable, but he wasn't valuable last year, which is what we're comparing him to. You lose Adam Thielen, same deal, right? You don't really add a guy. Like maybe it's Brian Asamoah starts, right? You don't really add a guy at linebacker yet. You don't really add a receiver yet. You've added Josh Oliver at tight end. You've added Marcus Davenport. You've added Byron Murphy, and you lost Patrick Peterson. Okay. Zadarius Smith is still technically on the roster right now. We'll see. He requested a release. The Vikings obviously don't want to do that, so they might explore a trade. The Marcus Davenport signing kind of points in that general direction. Doesn't have to, but it points in that general direction. He's currently on the roster, so I think it's inarguable that the team is less poopy than the Giants' opposition that night, right? But if you lose him, now you're kind of, now I don't know. So it kind of depends. But as of right now, before the draft, I would say they're a better team. We'll see how it continues from there.
I do enjoy all of the cap hell that's being created as a result of that loss.
Oh my gosh, the Giants are in a weird spot.
Yep. All because you won a playoff game. Iowa Josh asks, one day I'm like, they are burning down this team. And the next day, I'm like, basically the same team, minus Thielen. Which way is it? It's basically the same question, but this is... It feels a bit like...
Is the character of the team... Yeah, I would say...
It's the character that's missing.
Yeah, I would say that actually the character of the team is a lot different. And in that sense, they burned it down, but not to get bad, but to be different. I think it's going to feel like a lot different as a team. There are very few people left on this team that people remember from the Zimmer era. Very few. You got Danielle Hunter, you got Harrison Smith, at least on defense, right? And so, like, it feels pretty different, and it's going to feel different because that defense is going to be a lot different. There's been a gradual exodus of people that were acquired in the Rick Spielman regime, and is being replaced by Kwesi guys. So, I think it feels different, and I think they are kind of, in a sense, burning the roster construction of the team down, but not in any way that I'm alarmed. Just like, I think it's very different. I don't think it's the same team minus Thielen. Having Jefferson and Cousins and that offensive line, that's going to make it feel pretty similar, but I think you You transition to a more run forward offense, right? With Josh Oliver, you have a much better defense. It's going to feel like a different team in my eyes.
Next question is from from Jeff, who asks, what trade or free agent signing made by another team that the Vikings could have reasonably pulled off do you wish the Vikings had made instead?
Yeah, I looked at some of the contracts that I think I like the most at a position the Vikings could probably use. And the one I like a lot is the TJ Edwards contract that the Bears got. Now, they probably overpaid a little bit for Tremaine Edmonds, the other linebacker, but they added TJ Edwards, who played really well last year, outstandingly well. He doesn't have a ton of sideline-to-sideline speed, and I think that's what depressed his contract, but his level of play was very good. And he signed a deal that's worth $6 million on average over the course of 3 years. Not a ton guaranteed. It's $5 million in the first year of the contract, and you have an out in 2024. So it's basically can be a 1-year deal. I think that would have been better than restructuring Hicks, because I think Edwards is a better player who has played at a higher level more recently than Hicks has. So that I think would have been better for that amount of money. I thought that was a pretty reasonable deal. Jamel Dean to the Bucks, cornerback, $13 million a year. Byron Murphy, $11 million a year. But the thing is, Byron Murphy has an $8 million cap hit. Again, pretty good. Jamel Dean's cap hit in 2023 is $4.4 million. Now, obviously, you don't have an out on his. He's a good corner. He's just a very good corner. He's a top 10 corner in my eyes. So he's not going to be. You're not going to have an out in 2024. I think that's fine. Your out is in 2025, and his cap hit balloons at that point. But that's fine. He's a very, very good player. I think that the Vikings could have been able to match that. James Bradbury signed with the Eagles, also a very good player. We don't know what the structure of his contract is, but it's $12.6 million a year. Again, if Murphy's $11 million, I think Bradbury's worth $12.6 million. So I think that was kind of weird. Robert Woods, he's probably the guy I'm going to compare to Thielen in terms of the contract that they're likely to get. There's an easy out in 2024. It's a $7.6 million average contract, but it's only $5.5 million this year. I think they could have done that. So this is the free agents that I think kind of answer this question. As for trades, I think there were 3 trades that were worth taking a look at. 2 cornerbacks, one Jalen Ramsey, which is the 3rd-round pick, and some nobody tight end that's had 1 career catch. I'm saying that Josh Oliver's also only had like 1 career catch. But Hunter Long is meant to be a receiving tight end. That's kind of the difference. But yeah, 3rd-round pick and a backup tight end for Jalen Ramsey, who, yeah, his contract is technically average $20 million a year. And next year he's going to have a pretty large cap hit, but this year his cap hit's $4 million. So I would have traded a 3rd-round pick for Jalen Ramsey. Are you kidding me? The Vikings think they can win now. They don't have to get young guys. They can win now, according to them. So I think you should get somebody like that. And to me, Jalen Ramsey so a lot of people are talking about how he had a down year. I think numbers-wise he might have, but I still had him in terms of the performance that he had last year as a top 5 corner. Another top 5 corner got traded as well. Stephon Gilmore got traded to the Cowboys for a 5th-round pick. He has a $9.9 million cap hit this year for the Cowboys. I think the Vikings should do that. $9.9 million cap hit versus $8.75 million cap hit for Byron Murphy. Who would you rather have? Stephon Gilmore, obviously quite a bit older than Byron Murphy, but he's also quite a bit better. I thought he had a top 5 year. So I think that trade, I think you could have traded a 5th-round pick easily, 5th-round pick and a 6th, and now you've got a better deal than the Cowboys. And then Shaq Mason was traded to the Texans from the Buccaneers for a swap of a 7th-rounder and a 6th-rounder. So not even a 7th-rounder. It was a swap. He has a cap hit of $8.5 million. I think that he is a pretty decent guard. He played better for New England than he did the Buccaneers, which I think is why the trade happened. I just am still not sold on Ed Ingram. That's the only reason I want this one. I can see why trading for an $8.5 million guy is not like something the Vikings want to do when they've got an idea of who they want to start, but I just don't trust Ed Ingram. So I would have done that too, but I admit that 7th one, the 3rd trade, the 7th player I named, probably not as much as the first 6.
All right, next question is going to be from Jack, who asks, is the move to the Shanny system due to Kevin O'Connell's familiarity with it, the typical fact that tight ends are cheaper than wideouts, or is it because of how abysmal the McVay-based offenses did running the ball last year?
Did all the McVay-based offenses do a poor job running? I mean, like, Arthur Smith is a McVay-based offense, and for all of the problems the Atlanta Falcons had, and there were many, they ran the ball really, really well. So I don't know about that. LaFleur's offense in Green Bay is a McVay-based offense. They ran the ball right, pretty well actually. So I don't know if the McVay-based offenses did poorly. I think McVay's offense ran the ball poorly, and so did the Vikings. I don't know that, like, the Bengals didn't run the ball amazingly, but by the second half of the year, they were running the ball pretty well. So I don't know if that's the case. But I wouldn't say it's a move to the Shanahan system. It's a move to a personnel grouping that Shanahan uses more often than McVay does. But they're the same system, really. I mean, it's all based off of the Mike Shanahan stuff from like Denver way back. And then it just kind of, the Kubiak system kind of kept a lot of heavy concepts and kept outside zone versus wide zone. But the Shanahan system, I would argue that this is just the McVay. It's closer to the McVay system with a tight end, an additional tight end, than it is the Shanahan system, because the cues are still going to be all the McVay cues, right? They're going to ask the running back to make the McVay reads, right? They're just going to have another tight end. So I don't think it's a twist with Shanahan system. Unless you saw reporting that I didn't. That doesn't strike me as the most accurate characterization. Yeah. But yeah, McVay offenses ran the ball fine last year.
Euleron asks, how many picks will the Vikings have the night before the draft begins?
Well, actually, I mean, let's take a look right now. I was supposed to do this before the show, and I just kind of didn't, so my bad. But if I take a look now, I know that the Vikings don't have a second, right? So they've got a first-round pick, a third-round pick. Don't they have another third-round pick? Am I missing something? They must not. Fourth-round pick, a fifth-round pick, and a sixth-round pick. So they only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I remember taking a look at some mock draft simulators and being unimpressed with the number of players the Vikings got back. This question is basically, are the Vikings going to be able to trade a player for picks before the draft? And the players could include Dalvin Cook. They could include Zadarius Smith. They can include a guy we're not thinking of. I don't know who that would be. And let's say yes. Let's say they do. So I'll say they'll have 6 the night before the draft, and they'll finish with 8 draft picks. Those are my estimates.
All right. Paul asks, so we're basically drafting Bijan so that we have a generational running back on the roster for when Rodgers inevitably becomes a Viking in 24, right?
All of the parallels between Favre and Rodgers aside, it would be very tough for the Jets, if this trade ever actually happens, very tough for the Jets to cut Rodgers in 2024. Extremely tough. Not in the same way that Favre's contract. So I don't know, but obviously you have to draft Bijan, right? He's the best player in the draft. You got to draft him.
It seems likely at this point. It's dumb. This whole thing is so stupid. CH0 asks, overall, do you think that GMs overrate their own players more or fans underrate their own players more? What's the percentage difference? Feel free to copy off Luke Braun if necessary.
I will never copy off of Luke Braun. It's never necessary. Luke Bean. Do fans underrate their own players? I don't know that they do. I think they tend to overrate them. Compare CJ Ham to fullbacks around the league. He's not the best fullback in the league.
You shut your mouth right now. That's Ham heresy.
Now, players that you're frustrated with, like Kirk Cousins, you might underrate, right? But like, the tendency I have found is that fans tend to overrate their own players, and the general managers are much more likely to be closer to the NFL average on that player. So I don't know. I'd argue maybe the percentage difference runs in the opposite direction than anything. So I reject the premise of the question. That doesn't seem to be the nature of what I think it is. But I do think that general managers do hold on to their own players a lot longer than they should. Generally, right? In Minnesota, that's included like Kyle Rudolph and Adrian Peterson. And I mean, like we can name like a dozen.
Chad Greenway.
But you know, I think more often than not, fans overrate players and GMs. Sometimes overrate, but more underrate compared to fans.
Let's go to our next question, and that's from Ben, who asks, do you think the rugby maul-style pushing we saw throughout the season and playoffs to push for short yardage will become more common this season? As a former rugby player, I love the potential for using it, especially with the late lateral, in short conversion situations. Now, there was discussion about attempting to ban this right after the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and there's some stories in The Athletic with some league sourcing, and some of the objections were that it's just an ugly play. Which, I mean, whatever, right? Like, just outlaw whatever plays you want if you think that it makes the game worse. A lot of people are like, that's it? That's the reason? I'm like, yeah, that's a valid reason. I don't care. Like, they liberalized all the passing rules because passing is pretty, right? Like, that's why they did that. So, I don't know why that seems counterintuitive that they get rid of a play because it's ugly. Some people talked about the potential for injury. The NFL tends to approach this nowadays with studies. We don't have many studies on this, on what this kind of play could do to injury rates. I suspect not a ton. I don't know that the injury risk is remarkably high. So I don't know, but it does seem like, and some people are like, well, they want to ban it because you get so good doing it. And it's like, again, yes, I don't know what to tell you. Like, yeah, that happens all the time. We have the number of rules that they've invented in hockey and basketball for Shaq and Gretzky are innumerable, right? They invent rules to make sure that dominant players aren't dominant. That's normal. I'm sorry. Like, that just happens. I guess in basketball, sometimes it goes the opposite because they're like, hey, maybe they should make a 4-point line because Steph Curry, he's shooting way too well for that to only count 3, which that's fun too. I don't do it. I don't know. But like, that's just a thing that happens. Like, pass blocking was too hard. And instead of telling offensive linemen to get better, they're like, okay, we'll just change the rules so that you're allowed to use your hands. Like, that just happens, right? The chuck rule, the 1978 chuck, they got rid of the chuck rule, not because it was hurting receivers, and it was, is because they wanted to make passing better. Cornerbacks were too good. And so they were like, okay, well, now we're going to let them pass the ball. They change rules all the time because someone's too good at something. That's just what happens. So I like people being like, I can't believe you do that. Like, what? You can't? Really? Happens all the time. So yeah, I don't know. But like, so all of those reasons to me are just as legitimate as other reasons. Obviously, the injury reason, were it true, and I don't know that it is, but there's no studies one way or the other, would be kind of the best example of why that would be true. That's why they changed the kickoff rules, because the NFL found that the injury rate on kickoffs was much higher than any other play. Okay, well, we'll change. Fine, that makes sense. But for a lot of rules have been changed because the extra point rule was changed because kickers were making too many extra points. Like, that's like, I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, I don't know that rule is going to last. As for whether or not we're going to see more of it, I think we are. The thing that I think the Eagles did really well, which I think would be an argument to keep it at least for a year, is that they built plays off of it. Like, Ben, like you said, for lateral conversions and stuff like that. They built passing plays off of it, right? They did a number of outside runs, inside runs, and passing plays built off of that, two-cheek sneak, which I think is the best word for it. And it was like, that's why they had running backs back that are not offensive linemen pushing Jalen Hurts, because not only were those running backs like fairly effective at that particular job, they could also run the ball and catch pitches and stuff like that. So they were able to innovate off of it. So I think we're going to see more of it from more teams. I think they'll look into whether or not it's something they want to do. And I think more teams will use it. And then 3rd and 1s and 4th and 1s, they might look like they're gimmies. And then we'll kind of see if because what's the point of a 3rd and 1 if it's like a 90% conversion? And so the NFL might change it after that, but I think we're going to see more of it, and hopefully we get to see some of the innovation off of it before they probably ban it.
Yeah, NFL rules are reactionary. They are always reactionary. There's never any like forethought into it. Like, they never see something on the horizon and go, what would be good is to avoid that. No, right. Never. Yeah, never once in the history of the NFL has that been a thing. Oh, you guys are using something to help you catch, like, stick them? Is that ban it? Absolutely ban it. Ruins the game. Like, it's always reactionary. There's never been a time where they had a thought prior. Helmets becoming mandatory. That wasn't something they came up on their own with, surely. Like,
oh yeah, players are bleeding.
yeah,
Like, their heads were bleeding.
that's it's always reactionary. So no, I don't. No, that's just the way that's going to go. Kenneth Allen asks, was it really worth it to cut Dantzler? I know he didn't play up to his draft position, but doesn't the rookie contract generally make him cheap enough to keep?
Yeah, I don't think this is about, like, he didn't play up to his draft position, so let's cut him. Because, teams hold on to, like, first-round draft picks, even though they're not playing at a first-round level, because they're good players to have in your roster, and they don't cost that much. That's particularly true of third-round draft picks. So I think that's kind of why I think that there is something else at play, whether it's interaction with coaches, something off the field, something that we're not privy to, like his ability to pick up the system. I think it's something else that's related. I don't think it makes sense from like a locker room or from an on the field, this is the value he provides situation.
Also from Kenneth Allen, which article is Arif more proud of? His Brady retirement piece featuring all the shady things Brady's ever done, or the absolute evisceration of Rodgers after his pseudo announcement?
Pseudo announcement. That Kenneth put it all as one word. I like that, pseudo announcement. I think I'm more proud of the Brady piece because the Rodgers piece, there wasn't enough time to really dig in. So Ben Solak published a piece about a day later where he like really digs in, and I had to do a quick takeaways piece, and I just I had like an hour turnaround, I think. And I just turned the takeaways piece into that. And so it's like 5 takeaways from Aaron Rodgers' press conference. And it's just like this whole thing about, the nature of reality and media. So I forced a form onto it. And so I don't love the way it presents itself. It's just I said what I wanted to say in the format that made the most sense for a quick reaction. The Brady piece, I'm pretty happy with, I gotta say. It got published late in the day, and so it didn't get the traffic that I kind of hoped. But yeah, I was just like, hey, let's talk about Tom Brady's legacy. And the first half was like, yeah, this guy is a first ballot Hall of Famer. A lot of people consider him the greatest quarterback of all time. He's had all this stuff. Anyway, let's talk about it.
And let's have some fun with it. Because
let's have some fun with it.
Yeah, there's some fun skeletons in those closets. Also,
publicly reported skeletons that no one wants to bring up just because he's retired or whatever.
Yeah. Also, who will be the most excited by the news that Chris Thomason is leaving for Denver? Is there a higher or lower peak than live tweeting a funeral?
Oh, I don't think you can get that low. We're probably not seeing that again. But who's most? I mean, the problem is like the people I can think of are like the players most annoyed with Thomason probably, and I mean like to some extent this is just like reporting, right? The players most annoyed with Thomason were the ones that were like cut and then he asked them for a comment, right? In a lot of newspapers there's a policy where if you publish something that's newsworthy, you should have relevant quotes from sources because it adds credibility. So like I get it.
It sounds more like malicious compliance than anything else at that point.
I don't know that that's what he had in mind. I'll say that about Thomason. But yeah, those are the players most annoyed of them, the people that were just cut. Zimmer was very, I think pretty clear that Zimmer was not the world's biggest fan of Chris Thomason. Does he count for the purposes of this? Because I don't think he cares. Right? He's not dealing with anything.
He might care when he's doing press conferences for over in Colorado, and guess who shows up in the press pool?
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot that he's at Colorado. Oh no. Yeah, it's the opposite. Hey, he's upset.
This is the behavior of a jilted lover. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a quick jaunt from Denver to Boulder.
Mm-hmm.
Goes to a Deion Sanders press conference. It's like, hey, I got some questions for Mike Zimmer. I didn't even consider that he was at Colorado. Oh my gosh. Which that was confusing because it was rumored, and then the rumors were denied, and then it was reported. Then there was no follow-up reporting, so people didn't think the reports were true, and then it was announced. But yeah, he's there. Yeah, wow. I can't imagine a more upset person. Actually, it goes from Zimmer being happy to Zimmer looking over his shoulder. I would not trust things if that. Like I was just like, really, all the way over here. So yeah,
and you know he didn't delete his number from the phone.
Oh, absolutely not. Well, I mean, why? No reporter would do that.
No.
So, yeah, I feel like Harrison Smith's probably near the top of this list, though. I think he made it pretty clear.
Yeah. Sammy asks, for the show's professional writing corner, when is it appropriate to use the term scuttlebutt in writing within a professional medium? Also, can you comment on the word's etymology?
Overestimation that we have a professional writing. I mean, we do now that you've created it, Sammy. But like, we're shooting far ahead of where we are.
Be the change you want to see in this world. Thank you, Sammy.
In the sense that like I write for a living, it is professional writing. But in the common sense of the word professional, I don't know. I wouldn't go that far.
These people want to use your shoulders to step on as well. You're being on the shoulders of giants and everything. So tell us a bit more about scuttlebutt.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll start with
ignore the fact I called you tall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am tall. I'm 7'5".
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So scuttlebutt. So from etymonline.com, the etymology dictionary, the only one that I use. So, if it's bad, oops, all of the etymology related stuff I've said on the show, of which there are surprisingly many, is wrong. But, let's hope it's not. So scuttlebutt, 1805, cask of drinking water kept on a ship's deck, having a hole cut in it for a cup or a dipper. Scuttle is an opening in a ship's deck, but in this case means barrel. It used to be in 1777, it was called a scuttle cask. And the slang for scuttlebutt now, of course, means rumor or gossip. It's first used in that context as early recorded as 1901. And it was from the sailors' custom of gathering around the scuttlebutt to gossip, compared to water cooler, figurative for workplace gossip, in the mid-20th century. I read that I read all of it, obviously, but I was going to compare it to water cooler, and I didn't realize that they had also done that, which makes a lot of sense because they are professionals in every sense of the word. So, yeah, that's the word's etymology. I think that makes sense. I don't know if I have any other commentary on that other than reading the definition and agreeing with it. So that's my commentary. I guess it's been around since 1901, since the early 20th century. As for when it's appropriate to use the term, I don't know. That feels like, because it is slang-ish, but it's old slang, and old slang becomes like not formal writing, but it becomes like the kind of writing that's appropriate for a professional communication setting. This is still like casual writing, but a lot of newspaper writing, though classified as formal, is very casual. And obviously online writing within an online medium is significantly more casual than that. And so I would argue that in most settings, use of the word scuttlebutt is appropriate. It's not really appropriate for like forms or official documentation, stuff like medical records or government reports or whatever. Although, again, that can all vary within context. But I think that for most forms of, say, professional writing, it can be appropriate, depending on the tone of the story that you're writing or the tone of the piece that you're writing, to use the word scuttlebutt. I mean, the word butt is fine. I don't know why scuttlebutt wouldn't be.
Well, let's get to our next question, and that's from Bob the Pigeon, the Bull Sharif, who asks, which team will the Vikings quarterback Aaron Rodgers throw a game-losing interception against in the NFC Championship game in 2 years?
All right, so I think the key here is that we hate New Orleans now, but we didn't until then, right? And so we can't just pick a team that is like given the Vikings consistent consternation, right? It can't just be the Eagles, right? I don't think it's a division team. I think it creates a new rivalry. So it's got to be a team that has the ability to get there, right? In 2 years, which is going to be kind of difficult to predict. It has to be a team in the NFC, obviously. And it has to be a team that has not created issues for the Vikings in the past. Probably not a divisional team, although if it is the Detroit Lions, that's fine by me. I think that makes sense. But it is hard to hate the Detroit Lions. It just is. Not just because of who they've been historically, and you just kind of you're happy for them, but it's the Dan Campbell team. Come on, that guy rules. So like that one's tough. So it has to be a team that can become hateable, and within the NFC, it can't be the Cowboys. That they've been a historic I wouldn't say rival, but antagonist to the Vikings. Washington is easy to hate, but that just feels like I don't know. First of all, I don't know if Washington can get there in 2 years, so maybe that's part of it. Eagles obviously are out. I think the Giants could be there.
I was thinking either the Giants or the Cowboys. More likely the Giants.
The Cowboys, I think people already kind of hate them, and the Vikings have like a long history with them, so I don't know if I want to include them. The Falcons, I don't see them in there in 2 years. The Buccaneers, no. Panthers, same thing. So obviously the NFC West is this whole thing, but the Vikings have had problems with the Seahawks and the 49ers. I don't see the Cardinals getting there. And there's another NFC West team that I'm just like forgetting now. Yeah, I think it's probably the Giants, even though the Vikings lost to them in the playoffs just now. I don't think there is very much animosity about that. One, because the Vikings were kind of happy to be there. Two, it very much felt like the Vikings as a team just kind of lost, right? And not that the Giants won or that the Giants took away something. It wasn't a team of destiny, despite all those close wins. It was a team of BS, right? and it was kind of exposed, right? So the Giants could be there, maybe with the same quarterback, maybe with a new one. But certainly I think Rodgers throwing a pick to the Giants would be funny. If we wanted to include, and remember, Favre did not have any particular history with the Saints either, but if we wanted to make it funny, I think the 49ers would be the funniest team, right? Like, you just cannot get past the 49ers.
No, never once. That
would be very funny.
I would enjoy the rivalry continuing, going on to, like, I would enjoy in the Schadenfreude, like the word, like, it took a bit, I say a long time, it took a bit for me to be all in on the whole Favre thing. And even then, like, I was only like half following Favre as a Packer for a good number of years of his career. But like, you still knew him and you still hated him. But like, it took a while. And the first time I saw a Favre Viking jersey at a Cub, I took a step back. It felt wrong. But having Rodgers lose to the 49ers again in the NFC Championship game would just be too perfect. And it would have to be in Minnesota, too.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would have to be. God, I mean, it would be very funny. The 49ers have been a huge obstacle to the Vikings, but they haven't felt like an undeserving rival. They haven't felt like somebody that you grow to hate. I do think that they can become pretty hateable. I think so. They play really physical. That's like part of it, right? They're kind of a wall that you run into. I think that's part of it. And I think that, a couple of things the other way, like the personalities on the team aren't particularly, objectionable, but neither are they particularly compelling. So I think you can grow to hate them. So I think the 49ers are a good kind of second place to the Giants here.
Also, the question is being asked, will Rodgers defraud the welfare system of the state of Mississippi or California?
California, 100%. It feels less rife for abuse just because of the way the Mississippi welfare system was described. I would recommend watching the Bomani Jones clip. But California is not remarkably well administrated. I feel like there's a lot of area here for this one.
And of course, all of that is with the word allegedly attached to it. Kane asks, now that Aaron Rodgers is gone, who is the most annoying figure in the NFC North?
We had a discussion about this, and I can't think of anybody on the Lions, especially like the Lions haven't had very many. It's just Ndamukong Suh and Dominic Raiola, and we're way past that era, right? It could be an Amon-Ra St. Brown. I remember Golden Tate was pretty annoying as like a personality, but I don't see anybody on the Lions. The Bears, it's more the fan base than the players. I don't know any players that really bother me. Justin Fields seems like actually like kind of a cool guy, so I don't see that.
Yeah, he's a great guy who doesn't pass the ball. He's good.
Right, yeah. Everybody likes him. But And the Packers, we don't know what Jordan Love is like, but it'd be difficult to anoint him. So James and I were talking about this before the show, and we both came to the realization at the same time, it's probably Kirk Cousins.
It's weird, but it's very possible.
Yeah, right? It's probably Kirk Cousins, man.
Yeah. Bob Marks asks, Will Rogers. I love that.
It's good.
Will Rogers, but not that Will Rogers. Will Rogers and the old Packers wide receivers and tight end win more than 8 games with the Jets next year.
I mean, okay, so the thing that is really interesting to me about this wish list stuff is not how Rodgers mischaracterized the wish list as a demand list. That's annoying and boring. What's interesting to me is that it creates an interesting roster pressure because they have good receivers, right? More than just Garrett Wilson, right? So they've got Elijah Moore, who like broke out when it wasn't Zach Wilson throwing the ball. He played really well. They've got Corey Davis, right? They've got some players that like maybe it's time to move on, like Denzel Mims. They've got some players where they're probably not going to make the roster, like Malik Taylor. But you've got 3 guys that are good enough that they should just start, and another guy that like is kind of appealing, right? And so now you add Allen Lazard, you might add Randall Cobb, you might add Odell Beckham. Now, the issue is not that some of these guys might be upgrades. In fact, Allen Lazard is a starting quality player and is probably an upgrade over Corey Davis, maybe not. The issue is if you're the 4th best receiver and you're not one of those guys I just named, you might get cut because Rodgers was very insistent on players that were not as high quality on the field in terms of their contributions, but benefited Rodgers in some way, either because he liked them a lot or he could trust them or he did what they asked or they did what he asked when it came to on the field stuff. And so Elijah Moore is like better than Randall Cobb, right? But if it's like Odell Beckham and Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, Allen Lazard, and Randall Cobb, and Elijah Moore is like on the outside looking in, he might get cut for a worse player, right? Because Rodgers threw a fit about Jake Kumaro. He threw a fit about Randall Cobb. You know, he was very insistent that he wanted the players that he liked on the roster at the detriment to, according to the general manager's determination, to the detriment to the actual roster construction in terms of the quality of the players that they had. So it is possible that receiver core gets worse with the addition of signings because of the weird politics associated with the receivers that you're adding. That said, the Jets are a very good team absent quarterback, and if Rodgers plays well, which I think is more of a question mark than I think people are giving it. I mean, obviously people in the NFC North have like a pretty decent idea. But I think people in general are just like, yeah, Hall of Fame quarterback, great roster, boom, done. Jets had a great defense last year, phenomenal pass rush. They re-signed a bunch of guys. They're all coming back. They've got, Sauce Gardner. They've got DJ Reed. That defense is going to be great. They've got Garrett Wilson. They've got Elijah Moore. They've got Aaron Rodgers. They've got Breece Hall. It's going to be fantastic. And it's like Rodgers he's not been playing well. And it takes some time for him to get acclimated to new receivers. I do think they win more than 8 games. It's a really tough division. I do think they win more than 8 games. But I think that addition is going to be overrated.
I will be putting the bet on under this year.
Under 8 or under what the over-under is going to be?
It's under where the over-under is going to be, which I suspect is going to be like 8 or below. Like I'm... You bring together the fabled Super Bowl champion 2019 Pack. Oh no, you didn't. The fabled 2020 the Super Bowl pack. No, not them either. No, it seems like a mess for just. You don't get somebody with this much baggage and get something positive out of it. It doesn't work. And I am looking forward to watching this crash and burn and have him blame everyone else but himself. It's from your article, and I realize I'm his podcast host, but like this is a really good piece, and even Solak nailed it today, writing about how it wasn't necessarily reported incorrectly, but Rodgers was upset that he didn't get to, it didn't come directly from him, or he didn't get a chance to put his like spin on it. You get the feeling reading pieces like yours and Ben Solak's that Rodgers is really into closure, like really into closure on his terms. And
yeah, on his terms. But yeah, he wants a definitive answer spelled out in triplicate, right? Like he wants that, and he wants to be in control of how that operates, because there was some ambiguity. And Solak identified this particular contradiction pretty well. And I hate him, so obviously it's a good piece if I'm complimenting it. I'm going to break character for like just a second. People think I like legitimately hate Solak and Luke Braun and Trevor Sikkema and Michael Kist and Brett Coleman. There's a lot that I do the bit with.
Well, in Trevor's case, you were just trying to get him to commit. Like you were. No,
that's true. I was trying to get. I don't. Yeah. John Ledyard, which I mean, we had Ledyard on the show. We interacted pretty well. Solak was on the show too. But like, obviously, like I like all of these guys, and it's like very weird for people to DM me, like, "What's the beef between you two?" And it's like, okay, if we had a beef, it'd be none of your business. Get out of my DMs. Who are you, right? But like, I feel like it's obvious. It's a bit. Solak, who I do not respect, is like, who writes like that?
Like the only real thing about Solak is mentioning that he looks like an 8th grader, but other than that,
I mean, that part's just the truth.
Yeah.
But anyway, so in the piece that Solak wrote, that I thought that he had captured pretty well, the thing that I think Solak gets into that I didn't have very much time to get into was the kind of competing things Rodgers said in the interview about how he felt, how the Packers felt about him, right? Because he says he goes into the darkness retreat, which again, he loves that people talked about that. I'll just say that much. He goes into the darkness retreat thinking that the Packers will allow him to come to the decision on his own terms, and they'll welcome him back or they'll let him go, right? But then later in the interview, and then he comes out of the darkness retreat and he sees all these texts. His phone loads up and he sees all these texts, and he sees the quote from Mark Murphy saying essentially that he's gone or whatever, right? And then he realizes the Packers actually don't want him, and now he has to. And that's what motivated him to not retire, which is like unseen levels of petty, I think. But he later says in that same interview that he had long suspected that the Packers wanted to move on from him, right? And like, which is it, man? Did you go into the darkness retreat thinking that you could make a decision while they needed to make plans for free agency? Or did you think the Packers don't want me anymore, man? Like, which one did you like? It's one of the two. They're mutually exclusive. I don't know what it is. And to him, the way it reads when he's talking, it's whatever is convenient for the point that he's want to make at the time, that he's trying to make at the time, right? Because he wants to make the point in the first instance to say the Packers kind of betrayed him a little bit by saying one thing, and then while he was unable to contact people, saying another thing, which out of context, that sounds pretty awful, right? That is pretty bad, right? He doesn't have an opportunity to respond. And so he's the victim, right? Or he can say, hey, the Packers have waged a war against me since 2020, right? And when it's convenient to say that, that's when he thinks the Packers definitely want to move on, right? And so it's how he, and I hate people, I think, who know me, or at least know the way that I talk, or know the way that I talk about these particular issues. I don't really believe in like the phrase victim mentality. I think that's stupid. He even uses it. It's like, I don't have a victim mentality. And it's like, what is that, right? But if that phrase has any meaning at all, right, he 100% has it, because he has a list of grievances that he feels the need to air out in order for him to make his point, right? And in order for him to justify morally what he's doing, right? And he talked about woke cancel culture, right, when he was talking about the vaccine stuff, and he accused the media of lying about the way that he characterized the vaccine evidence, which, again, Solak gets into that. I didn't talk about vaccines in my piece. But, like, he misled, I think he outright lied, but even if he didn't, he misled people about the nature of vaccination. And the Packers assisted him, right? Talk about, like, an organization that is actually behind you. They assisted him in this deception because every player who was not vaccinated did their media availability over Zoom. Rodgers did not. He did his media availability in person like all the other vaccinated players. Tell me how that's not the Packers assisting Rodgers in misleading the media about his vaccination status. Now, you can make the argument that it's nobody's business, but he didn't do that. He told you that he was immunized, implying that he was vaccinated. He could have just said, it's none of your business. The way Dak Prescott said it, the way Lamar Jackson said it, the way that Josh Allen said it. Now, a couple of those people were vaccinated, and they still said it's none of your business. That's the whole point of being able to say that, right? But that's not what he said, right? And so in kind of the same way, he was like, oh, these people accuse me of lying, but actually they're the liars, and they're trying to cancel me, and the woke mob is coming after me. And he used those phrases. And I can't think of any more victim mentality thing than to talk about how you're being canceled by the woke mob. That's the most victim mentality stuff I've ever heard. So, like, that's the way that he wants to be seen when it's convenient for him. And so, as both of us point out, it's important for him to control the narrative, but he does it in ways that contradict, because when he's making different points, it comes across differently. So he has to change the facts retroactively to meet that conclusion that he's trying to get you to reach, because all that matters at the end is the series of conclusions that you come to, right? And the series of conclusions there are: the Packers betrayed him, the Packers undermined him at every opportunity. He loves the city of Green Bay. He loves the fans of Green Bay. And he has essentially been forced to kind of make this decision, but he gets to make it with people he loves. People like Nathaniel Hackett, people like Randall Cobb, people like Alan Lazard, right? And so he is trying to move forward. Again, these are all the conclusions that he's trying to lay out. He's trying to move forward given the position that he's in. But the problem is when you look at these conclusions and how he arrives at these conclusions, all of the individual conclusions have competing sets of facts that don't accord with each other. They contradict. But from a communication standpoint, most people generally take away the conclusions and not the ways that people get there. And he is trying to do that by changing the facts in different ways to get you to all these conclusions to construct the end story that makes a lot of sense, but not the ways that you get there. So, yeah, that's like the thing about the two pieces that we put out that we're trying to get across here is I don't mind that Rodgers likes attention, right? Like, how often do I criticize Stephon Diggs for liking attention? Sometimes, not a ton, mostly not, right? How often do I criticize Adam Thielen for being kind of a diva on the field, not off the field? Off the field, he's been fantastic, right? But kind of a diva on the field, right? Not often, right? I love attention, obviously. I'm doing a podcast that I don't get paid that much for because I love attention, right? My whole industry is attention. I don't mind that. Just admit it, man. Like, he keeps on talking like he doesn't love attention, that he doesn't want to be a victim. And it's like, that's the thing that bothers. He's just lying to everybody and himself. Like, I love direct communication. Really, dude? I don't know. So, like, that's the thing that gets me. That we're trying to get across is that Rodgers is like hell-bent on controlling a narrative and does not use the available opportunities he has to him in order to do that, because it's also important that he can isolate himself from the rest of that. So when reporters ask him to correct a story, he refuses to do it, right? Because he doesn't get to control how reporters interact with his disclosure, but it lets the story get out of control. And then when that story gets out of control, he could say, hey, the media let the story get out of control. And it's like, no, the media didn't. You did, right? Because we see this report about a wish list. Two people communicate to you. You said that Diana Rossini contacted you and that Adam Schefter contacted you. And you said you didn't respond to Diana Rossini, and you said to Adam Schefter to lose the number. If you had responded to them, they would have been able to say, actually, this is what Rodgers thinks. And they didn't. And they did their due diligence. And with the information they had, they reported the story because they have more than one source outside of just you. And you were given an opportunity to, in your mind, correct the record, and you turned it down. And now you're mad that the story got out of control. Because the victimization is important too. It's not just controlling the narrative. It's also being able to say that these people are all aligned and arrayed against me. So that's how I feel about the whole thing.
I do enjoy the awkwardness that he put Adam Schefter through on TV.
Okay, that is funny.
I enjoyed that part. As far as reporters and players go, the Thomasons better, but like that's still good. That's still funny, and it's always fun to see Schefter fall lately. So yeah, I enjoyed that part. Let's wrap up some of the mailbag. Let's knock a couple of these out here quick. Kevin, how long will it take the New York media to start questioning Rogers on some of his quote views? Boy,
2 seconds.
Boy,
2 seconds.
Your thing got picked up. My tweet got picked up. Like,
oh yeah. It got picked up in a couple of places. Ty Dunn, who I went back and forth with about the Bengals thing, he linked to my tweet in his story called Bravo Green Bay, or Bravo Packers, I think.
Yeah.
Which man, because there's the thing where Deshaun Kaiser reveals the number of conspiracy theories that Rogers shared with him and told him to investigate. There's also the thing from Seneca Wallace from a couple of years earlier about Rogers believing in chemtrails. There's a lot going on here. And then obviously there's the stuff where Rogers is interacting a lot with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, in a prior life, was like really super into these conspiracy theories. He still kind of is, but that's not like the shtick of the podcast anymore, right? Like before it was just like, hey, I don't know about lizard people. You want to talk about that? That's crazy. And now it's just like, hey man, there's something wrong with the government. Might be lizards. Like it's a little different, you know. But
Jamie, pull that up.
Jamie, pull that up. Wow, crazy. But is that true? Crazy. But yeah, I mean, there's like, right, because like COVID is a modern, or the way the COVID conspiracies have gone across are modern conspiracies, right? And so he's bought into those as well, for the most part, right? But the one that sticks out is the 9/11 one, because he's going to New York
to play for the Jets.
The Jets. So, yeah, I think I can't imagine that there are zero people in the New York media that have not heard his comments about, or not heard Deshaun Kaiser's comments about that. I think they'll ask, absolutely. And I certainly think that outlets like the New York Post, which are a little bit more into stirring some stuff up, are probably even more likely to ask. But I wouldn't be shocked if, you know, even if like places that generally are above kind of stirring stuff up, like The Athletic, right, might ask, because I feel like it's pretty relevant to fans. So 2 seconds. I'd like, he could be in the middle of his opening statement and somebody could be like, hey, what do you think about 9/11?
Just in 2 sentences or more, please explain your views on this, please. No, sorry, 3 sentences or less. Let's go with that.
Yeah, right.
Micah asks, is Rogers heading to the Jets proof of Nietzsche's theory of the eternal reoccurrence of the same?
The eternal recurrence of the same is a choice that a demon forces you to make. It's not times a flat circle of history repeats. And, you know, any Nietzsche scholars, of which there's at least one that listens to this show. So I was going to say, I don't know what's gone wrong with your life, but you are a Nietzsche scholar. So I feel like that kind of answers itself. But correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really more of like a thought experiment about the way that you live your life. Live your life in a manner, not even just live your life, approach your life in a manner such that if a demon forced you to make a choice, like trapped you in a room and forced you to make a choice where you would have to relive your life in exactly the same way, you don't get to make different choices, would you answer yes? And not just would you answer yes, would you answer yes without hesitation? Right. And it's less about like the choices you make. And Nietzsche's also been into like rolling the dice and stuff like that. It's less about the choices you make and more about the attitude that you have when you approach those choices. So no, it's not about like times a flat circle of history repeats itself. In fact, one could argue that the Packers are not living in that kind of Nietzschean way, because when approached with the opportunity to repeat a portion of their life, they choose not to do it. Right. So I would say it's not living proof of the theory, but rather a case study in how a team approaches it.
All right, let's go to our next question, which is going to be from Tim Rizzo, who asks, how many compensation picks are we set to receive for losing Thomason to the Broncos?
I mean, I guess we don't know the contract terms over the Denver Post, but it sounds like he's going to be wide receiver 2 to Woody Page, right? So
yeah,
that's a pretty healthy contract. I would say probably a 4th round pick. from the Broncos in 2024.
It's about time. It's about time. The Broncos famous for having a lot of picks this year. Trill Swaggets asks, with Diggs going back to his bag of tricks by unfollowing the Bills organization and players on social media, what is the most petty thing James and Arif posted in the early Facebook or MySpace social media era? Example, putting, I guess loyalty is optional to some people on a Facebook status.
All right, so I had to think about this before the show, and I racked my brain, and I couldn't think of it because I know I've vague posted in social media a ton, right? A little bit on Twitter, but primarily on Facebook and LiveJournal, right? And I was trying to think, and then I came up with what it was, and of course, none of you are going to be surprised by this. It's about debate. And
I'm shocked.
Again, it's the only thing I cared about in high school, and we are talking about a thing that occurred in high school. So that's just going to have to be what it was. It was probably a prelim round. It was probably an elim round for me to be mad enough to post about it. But, I lost a debate, right? And I get home and I angrily type on Facebook, I guess it is hard to read the sentence. It is inevitable that this will trigger a series of, I don't remember the specific sentence, but it's like the character of the sentence is like, it is inevitable that, X thing will trigger a series of events that lead us down the path to war or something like that. Right. And that's what I posted. I guess it's hard to read the sentence blank. Right. And a bunch of people are like, what are you talking about? Because most of my friends weren't in debate. Like, why would you post such a weird sentence? And my issue was that the judge who read my evidence in that round did not judge that evidence to be credible enough to establish my argument, which was that their thing would lead to nuclear war or whatever. Right. And, I was in high school. I'm sure that my memory of it and what actually happened are very far apart. But the way I remember it is that I got screwed out of the round because the judge didn't read the card correctly or whatever. The card is the word that we use to describe pieces of evidence or cards. And so I posted it. The problem is I was friends with that judge on Facebook and they saw it. And so I got a talking to from my debate coach about that post, which I did, of course, take down. And the judge did end up judging me later on that year, actually. Very awkward. Did vote for us, though. So I will say that. But
I'm so glad that when I was in debate, social media was not a thing. It would have gone poorly.
I got so heated about it. Because especially high schoolers, but debaters, they never lose a round, right? They just get screwed.
Naturally. That's kind of how that works.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous. Boy. See, I think the most, or recently I wasn't the most subtle person on the planet, but when my marriage ended and I wanted to, everyone knew it. It was pretty obvious that everybody knew. And instead of doing what the other party was doing, which was posting and raving all over social media, which if you ever want to show people that you're stable, that's a good way to do it. Instead of responding to anything that was being said, I merely posted a clip that I recorded from BoJack Horseman where there was an elephant building something in a room. And the woman walks into the BoJack's room and goes, "Are we going to talk about the elephant in the room?" And the elephant goes, "Really? Jeez!" And just acts all indignant and drops his hammer and goes, "You know what? And then just leave. That's about as good as I was gonna get. I wanted everyone to know I knew too, and just be like, I'm good. I'm fine here. Whatever. This is my response to everything happening outside of me. So, yeah, that's about as good as I was going to get. Let's end with Adam Bryant asking, will we ever get an update on the Arif body pillow? Hey, guess what came in the mail? I did not ask for this. I did not order this. In fact, I said it shouldn't exist at one point, and Damian Barrett decided otherwise. So in the mail, and on the YouTube channel for Norse Code, you can find the video of me opening the bag. It was going to be the box opening, but it was a bag. And an Arif throw pillow has been put into this world. and it is an abomination. It emboldens our enemies, and it's terrifying. The fact that I have it in my home and may have to like, I feel like what's going to happen is something terrible is going to happen to me, and like they're going to find me, and like, you know, the coroner is going to be writing stuff up, and my family is going to be going through my home, and they're going to find the Arif throw pillow, and my dad's just going to be covering his head in shame. Like, really?
I mean, yeah.
My son has this in his home. I raised him better than to have an Arif body pillow. So we have one in existence. I have no idea what we're going to do with it, but one does exist. I've got a wonderful bonfire I can use when the snow melts in June, but like, I feel like if I burn it, it's gonna release something evil, like more evil, into the air. Like it may have trapped a spirit or something in its current form. It's not right.
It's.
I mean, I could give it to you. Like,
you could burn it.
I could give it to you and
could burn
see
it.
If...
It's flammable. That's a throw that out there.
I feel like, you know, you go on some of these trips for work. Would Chelsea appreciate the
last
body pillow?
The last thing I could think of is that, actually. You know how like absence makes the heart grow fonder? I feel like a distorted reminder makes the heart grow
slightly darker. Pixelated reminder. Right, like,
these are all of the worst things associated with him. And that's all I get to see while he's like that. Feels like an L for me. I feel like that wouldn't happen.
You're taking the L on that one.
Yeah, I don't want that. I don't want that.
It's not right. I feel like I should send it to Dropplay Dave, but I feel like he would like do something worse with it.
What? Okay, wait, that's true. But it is important to note that he doesn't even think it's done.
No, I sent it to him.
Draft.
I sent it to him. Like what I
mean is that the drawing was his first draft.
Oh, yeah. Like he may look at this and go, I know what I need to do now that I've seen the physical version of this to make this work. Like he'll go into the lab and pump something out and be like, no charge, James. Like, oh no. Now I have to monetize this. Oh, crap. So yes, it does exist. Check out the Norse Code YouTube channel, which is a thing. Our episodes do get posted to YouTube. We don't have a ton of subscribers because everybody subscribes through like podcast things. We don't do videos very often, so why would you want to do that?
Yeah. It's just the Norse Code logo and the podcast. So I get it.
Yeah. So it's that. So check it out. It's not right, but it should be seen. It should be seen on this world.
Should is a strong word too. I don't know about that.
Did you know people can comment on posts on Spotify now? Like, I don't know why Spotify has decided to do this, but now you can comment on Spotify posts.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of, we haven't had like a review in like years. We've had one or two on our iTunes, and I don't know, throw some 5 stars there.
There you go.
Yeah.
Let's
by the way,
yeah. I noticed this. I got a notification that somebody had commented on the Spotify thing. It's like,
and you're like, I didn't even know that was a thing.
That's a thing now? And
That's
I checked
crazy.
it. And it was literally a fellow who was just saying, great show. Also, if I write this, can you see this? Like, I never noticed this before.
In the comment?
Yeah, that was in the comment. And I was like, I
Fair
can't
enough.
direct. And the problem is I can't direct respond to it like you would a YouTube comment.
There's no like comment. There's no reply to the comment?
No, nothing. I can block him. I can remove his message, but I couldn't comment on it.
If you blocked it, that's proof that you saw it.
It feels like, well, yeah. So it's like, it feels like, the opposite of the intended goal as far as like social when I say these things, but sure, why not? So to answer your question, yes, I did get it, and we can't do anything with it, but I have put up something for this particular episode as a thing you can comment on. Yes, so appreciate the words. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So there's the Rodgers piece, obviously. I'll link the Brady piece too, just because that was referenced. But every day I've been coming up with like free agency winners and losers. Today, I talked about winners. Last 2 days, I talked about losers. Someone else got to handle the other side of it. And then on the first day, and I'm counting the beginning of like the legal tampering period, so it's 4 days, not 2. The first day I did winners and losers. So you can find all of that there. I've got some commentary on a couple of specific signings as well as analysis there. So that'll all be linked in the show notes. But if you just want a really quick way to get there, profootballnetwork.com/author/A Hassan. Again, Pro Football Network is where all of my pieces are. So head over there.
Well, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back soon.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.